Hey folks, Jason here. Before we get into the episode, I just want to draw your attention to the form that is now in our podcast descriptions. Use this form to provide us any feedback, any questions, any comments, and we'll happily read those. And our deal to you is that if we get enough questions coming through, we will create a dedicated AMA style section to one of our upcoming recordings. So make use of the form, and without further ado, enjoy this episode of the Idea Roastery. Hey everyone, welcome to the Idea Roastery. I'm Jason.
And I'm Herman.
Herman, I want to know, where do you get your news from?
That's actually a really good question. I guess the main place that I get my news from would actually be Hacker News. And while that predominantly focuses on, people's personal blogs about how to give superpowers to the C programming language, it's also got tidbits of articles about energy developments and political things, although it is supposed to be a non-political space, which I actually appreciate because politics will inevitably seep into every space. And so I get enough politics from the space that is anti-politics. And so, for example, this morning I was reading a long piece on the development of geothermal energy and how it's made leaps and bounds in the last 5 years, especially as a lot of the manufacturing capability from the gas and oil industry, specifically fracking, can now be used to set up geothermal wells. That's essentially where I get my news. I'm not chronically online in any way except for browsing the first page of Hacker News like once a day, once every 2 days.
Mm. And do you ever have in your social connections, do people ever bring up topics like what's going on in the world or ask your opinion about something that's, possibly happening in the world today kind of thing?
I think I'm actually kind of lucky in that none of, or very few of my friends are explicitly political, and I tend to have a pretty good grasp of geopolitics without being inundated with political vitriol. And I can sort of say the same for the people in my friend group, is I actually very rarely find myself talking about stuff that would be on the news. Instead, maybe we'd be talking about new developments, events, ideas, but I very rarely will have a conversation with someone about what's happening in Israel and Palestine, which I really appreciate.
Mm. Do you think there's a place for it? Do you think because there's obviously things like what they call them here is like think tanks, and there's a lot of discourse around not just politics, but I guess society in general. And it's almost like maybe it's like an old-fashioned thing that back in the day it was quite kind of expected if you were to be like a intellectual sort of businessman, you had to kind of know what was going on in the world and have an opinion on everything. Do you think there's a place for that?
I think it's good to be informed, and I think that the news as it currently stands right now is not informing so much as it is riling up. So if we take a look back to like the 1950s, there were three channels on the television, and so everyone essentially consumed the same news. Whereas right now, you can go and you can consume your flavor of the news 24/7, and I can go and consume my flavor of the news 24/7. And each of these newses are made to make us more unhappy and more disenfranchised with the world, more give us the feeling that everything is crumbling because, again, like the news doesn't say, hey, 200,000 children didn't die this year from polio. Instead, it's like this one person was stabbed in her home, and there's gangs doing things. And I feel like people are more and more arguing from a basis of having different sets of facts. Now, I am a firm believer that there is such a thing as an objective truth. And I feel like the news as it currently is distributed is not an objective truth pretty much well for most people because they tend to be down the one rabbit hole. And I think the second thing is that I operate really well in the world and in conversation without explicitly going and consuming the news because again the content of it isn't super important. And so I I don't feel like I'm at a lack of information or like I don't have the ability to keep up to date in society.
Yeah, so the thing that I was thinking about is if you are or if a person is removed from the news, there always comes a point where so if you think of the idea of news and kind of like maybe societal's position, the point of it in history was always to kind of like showcase the people in power and show things that were potentially wrong. And I think one of the places where it maybe does become important to know what's going on in the world is for things like elections, right? So if you were to have an election tomorrow and you haven't known, you haven't like seen, the state of what's going on, you might make a uninformed decision as to who you want to kind of govern your society. But then I've been thinking about it in terms of these, I kind of think of them as like zones of influence, right? So like, I think in a normal sense, because I have like maybe a bit of a, I don't know if it's like a stoic point of view where I'm like, I kind of reject anything that I can't really control, that I kind of also think of it in terms of like, well, it's outside of my control. I shouldn't be worried about it. And but I do think there are certain strands where it maybe is important to kind of at least even on just like, in your local area, have some sort of understanding of what's going on. Like for instance, someone gets stabbed on your road. You're obviously quite concerned about that, and maybe it is something that you want to have a bit of information about. But I do agree with you that I think because the friction has been removed from news. Like it's no longer having to be like, typed out by someone. Someone's going to have to think it through, do their research, publish it, and then it gets printed and sold in newspapers. I think because the friction is so low, anything can kind of just be like thrown out there. And I think there's like, or maybe I'll put it to you, do you think there's like a degradation of this idea of like journalistic integrity? Because I know like you also running a sort of blogging platform, you must have come across like, I mean, you don't really like vet what's written, but there must be like integrity in how things are written. And you obviously write a lot yourself. So do you think there's like a loss of integrity, or do you think it's just that people just post stuff for posting stuff because that's like a fun thing to do?
Mm. I think what you nailed a very good point over there is that I think news is kind of like calories, right? Is that throughout all of human history until the present day, we had too few calories, right? And right now we have an excess amount. So the biggest problem that we have public health wise is obesity. In the same way, we've got like this high caloric news media that is just pumping news into our faces all the time. And the thing is that like I even find that it affects me is like I was at a coffee shop recently and I just pulled a newspaper off the wall because, hey, let me take a look at what's in the news. And I saw something along the lines of that a whole bunch of people, a whole bunch of countries had pulled out of the G20, which is being held in South Africa this year, mostly spurred on by the American administration because they have ideas about things that are going on in South Africa that are definitively false. Now, it annoyed me. Like, I found myself reading this and being annoyed, and there's like nothing I can do about it. My day would have been significantly better had I not dug into that. But I was sitting there, like, and I realized that this is what people do feel like a lot of the time, especially if they're on these high calorie information diets, is that minor annoyance that I was feeling they're feeling it all the time, especially if you're like retired and you sit and you watch the 24-hour news cycle. I think that the concept of journalistic integrity does exist in certain niches. However, the vast majority of it is not trying to optimize for journalistic integrity. They're trying to optimize for outrage, for viewership. There's a whole bunch of metrics that they're optimizing for, and journalistic integrity and finding the truth isn't necessarily one of them, right? Because if you let's say, for instance, you are a news channel and you have a very specific target audience, and then you say something that is true, but it doesn't vibe with the people who you're supposed to be serving, you're going to have fewer people watch your stuff. You're going to get fewer dollars of ad revenue, and so you are disincentivized from actually having journalistic integrity over there. So yeah, absolutely. I think that journalistic integrity is trending downhill, with the exception of a few niches. Um, and we're just incentivized to be unhappy and angry and scared. I think scared is actually a very big word over there. I think that the news is there to scare people.
Is it there to scare people, or is it more just that negative news seems to travel further? I think there's like a natural instinct. I think as if we were like back in like thousands of years ago, where we're like, trying to avoid getting eaten by like a predator, you'd be like, oh, don't go there because that's where the predator is. And it's a very sort of instinctual thing to say, like, oh, where's the things that are going to potentially harm me? Is it just that lensing effect, or is it, I guess maybe there's another thing you were mentioning is more about like the choice of what you consume.
Mm. Well, I think you're entirely right over there, and this has actually been studied, has been studied quite thoroughly, and it's humans have what's called a pessimism bias, right? And it makes perfect sense when you think about our ancestors, is if you were worried about, a bad weather event or a saber-toothed tiger being in the bushes, et cetera, the people who did worry more than the others just didn't turn up dead, right? Now, in our modern world, like a lot of these problems, specific, let's call it specifically in the developed world, or especially in the developed world, is like we still have this pessimism bias, and we still think that the world is going to end, even when all actual evidence points to the contrary, right? So I read I've read a few books on this topic. One of them that sticks out to me is Enlightenment Now by Steven Pinker, where he essentially makes the case that while the entire world is telling us that civilization is going to be ending within our lifetime, throughout all of human history, every generation thought that this is where it ends. Like this is where, the moral decline happens, or this is when we have civilizational breakdown. And it's very rarely the case. Like in just the 33 years that you and I have been alive, or yeah, is we've kind of seen what could only be described as like a reverse apocalypse, right? Is more people than ever globally have access to running water and roofs over their head and sanitation and food. Like global hunger rates have collapsed, right? It's now single digit percentages. Um, and the major problems that we have in the world are either the problems of having so much and being so wealthy, heart disease, obesity, et cetera, but also just the the problems of this excess of information and connectivity that is also like making us pretty unhappy about what's currently happening.
Yeah. Where does the burden of responsibility lie? Because like I showed you before this session, like Grokopedia, which is like Elon Musk's idea of how to create like a new Wikipedia that's like trawls the internet and then picks up like, I guess, empirical facts and then like uses logic to kind of form this like truth of what something is. I guess the problem is that because there's this low friction and because social media, or as I'm calling it more these days, marketing media, is it's allowing you to kind of have a lot of different points of view from other people, and there's a lot less sort of verification of what is that underlying fact. Like if you look on social media, like the big topic in the UK is like people getting jailed for social media posts. It's like for me to go and verify that through data, that's like an onerous thing on my part. And is it who should be the one who should be verifying this information and telling it? Because I think this is almost like getting into kind of what crypto talks about is like in trust but verify
It's
is
like
like
information on the
like who
blockchain.
yeah, because you need to you almost there needs to be some people that you trust in society
Mm.
and in a way it's almost efficient. I think we've even talked about it before. It's like it's efficient to find one or two people who are kind of is like they're the expert in that domain so that you don't have to go and verify. And maybe it's just like, or where do you think is it like everyone has to have like a healthy dose of skepticism to whatever they read? Or should we like maybe have a ranking of like I saw one post or one article the other day like like the FT is rated quite highly in terms of trustability and then obviously tabloids are like way lower in terms of like whether you trust the content. Do we just need to have that and then try and like just pick very I guess that's maybe on your line of talking is like a healthy source of news.
I think that there's a big problem with this concept, and that is that people don't seem to be interested in actually finding the truth. Because the fact of the matter is that like if you are motivated to find the truth, you can probably find it. Like if I hear something along the lines of like seed oils are bad, right? I can personally go and I can verify this, right? I can go and I can take a look at the research and I take a look at a bunch of studies that study seed oils and I see like, oh, actually, there's no data that suggests that seed oils are bad. There are just a couple of anecdotes from a specific flavor of podcaster, right? And in so doing, I can kind of find something truthy, right? But most people aren't actually interested in doing that work. In many cases, people aren't even interested in doing the bare minimum of work of just like asking Siri or something like that, right? Or whatever their LLM of choices, or Googling it. I was at breakfast the other day, and I was chatting to this older lady who's probably in her mid 60s, and she was telling me about how the electric cars were a thing 100 years ago, which is true. Electric cars came out before petrol cars because the electric motor is just so much simpler than the petrol motor. But she then framed it to be this big conspiracy because it was shut down by the fossil fuel companies, and it, I thought she was going to go the direction of like Al Gore's Who Killed the Electric Car. Or she said some darned stuff. She's like, and they would drive for 1,000 kilometers, no problem. And I'm like, this doesn't track with energy density of batteries. Like, if you were to go and just do a quick Google search saying, were there cars 100 years ago that could drive 1,000 kilometers, is it doesn't even pass the sniff test, right? But she never went and checked that out, and to be entirely honest, I didn't feel like arguing with her. But I think that there's a whole bunch of people who are not actually interested. No, I think the vast majority of people are not really interested in verifying information. And so even if we have let's assume for a second that Grokkipedia manages to be the ultimate truth-seeking resource on the internet, is that people tend to decide on something and then find ways to backwards justify it, right? So they won't say like, I think seed oils are bad. Go to Grokkipedia. Grokkipedia says, actually, seed oils are good. And then them say, hmm, okay, I guess I was wrong.
Yeah. I think that comes up quite a lot is also in the podcast that you mentioned is that people are very like not willing to change their minds or be shown to change their minds. And it's almost to a fault here. Like I've seen politicians who are like, or people's views of politicians is that they are absolutely 100% not allowed to change their mind about things.
Mm.
And
Which is very
I think that
unfortunate.
yeah, no, it is it is a challenge. So I think maybe moving a little bit more into the action side, because I think there is something to be said about like how people sort of consume their daily dose of news. There is a verification problem, I think. Maybe it will be fixed a little bit because I think there is a trend now with Substacks and things like that that people are now it's now a person that is purveying the news and not an organization. And I think when there is a person behind it, they're obviously a bit more incentivized to keep their own integrity and their name in a good standing. Because I think the thing about trust is it's really built up over time. You know, the reason why Hacker News is so trusted by you is because over time, for a long period of time, they've only really posted a very specific type of content. And so if they were to tomorrow like start posting like the latest political scoop or whatever, then it would lose that trust and you would kind of like it would disintegrate.
Well, I think just to clarify for a moment for people who don't know, so Hacker News is really just a link aggregator. So people can post links on it. I think of it as kind of like one big subreddit, it's just for articles, right? So um, the readership of Hacker News are generally like tech people, engineers, researchers, etc., etc. And so you can just upvote. Uh, I think you can only upvote or you can downvote. No, you can only upvote. And then they have a ranking algorithm that essentially ranks all those posts over time. And there's such a large reader base. And when I say a diverse reader base, while they are all, while they are mostly technical people, they come from a completely global and a distributed set of political backgrounds. And so they don't swing like specifically American Republican or like German left wing is it's a bit of everything, which is actually quite nice because it aggregates in a way that I find to be fairly truth-seeking and fairly equitable, as opposed to if it were all just a like American left-wing news
Yeah.
site.
But I think that also could be, I mean, it's a little bit of a tricky topic, but I think that could also be the intellectual nature of their reader base, as is usually like engineers and scientists. And I find that it's easy for people to kind of see like a counter view, whereas on like social medias like X, it's just like, there's all forms of like bots and like, there's a lot of like manipulation that I think is going on there. Moving back to what I was saying about action is like, I know I said that, there's like a zone of influence of like what you can control and what you can't. But do you think that that we are maybe misunderstanding how much action we can actually apply to problems? Because I think there's an argument to say that, oh, like what's happening in the Middle East is nothing that I can really control. And so I'm just going to eject myself from that, which is kind of what I do, to be honest, is like, similar to like what we were talking about slow productivity is I feel like there's only a certain amount of things I can kind of have in my head at one point. And it does come across as like being a bit cold. It's like, oh man, what you don't care about like all these people that are like, in wars and stuff around the world. It's like, yeah, but I can't really do anything about it. But do you think that there is more to be done, either in like advocating for it or like, talking about it or like coming to a conclusion? Or do you think it's like, I guess there's a line there. I've acknowledged that somewhere.
So this is something that I have thought about, and you make a very good point over there, is that yes, there are bad things that are happening everywhere, right? What is interesting is that the let's take for instance the wars that are happening overseas or in other parts of the world, their social media popularity is not equal, right? So while we get inundated with the news of Israel and Palestine as well as Ukraine, um, very few people in the developed world are familiar with what has been happening recently between Ethiopia and Eritrea, where more lives have been lost than in either of these two conflicts. Maybe that's changed over time. I haven't updated those stats in a while. Um, but this is just not on people's radar. And if we think about, all human lives as being equal, then we should be equally unhappy about what's happening in Ethiopia and Eritrea or what's been happening on the border of Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. And the fact of the matter is that we're not because they're not in the news cycle, they're not in the social media cycle. So my personal take on all of this is that if you are trying to care about every injustice in the world, you're going to have a very miserable life and you're not going to have enough time to keep up with all of it. Instead, if you care strongly about something, focus on that one thing. If, this specific conflict is something that is close to your heart, maybe there's family there or whatever, go get involved with an organization, donate money, donate time, advocate, do that. But I think the problem is that we're so fractured right now because we're supposed to care about everything. And in by caring about everything, we essentially just become keyboard warriors, creating a worse environment for everyone. And so, like, I personally only try to get properly involved in things that are relevant to me and my sphere of influence. So I care about online privacy and I mean that because of the work that I do on Bear. And then I also care about stuff happening in Cape Town and South Africa more broadly, but specifically Cape Town, like the homeless and unemployment problem that we have over here. I donate money to try and improve that situation. And I also care about the degradation of our oceans. So I donate money to an oceanic fund that tries to increase the size of no-take areas in and around the Western Cape waterways. And that's the extent of it. I'm not I I like even saying this, I kind of feel bad for saying it. It's like I don't care about what's happening in Ukraine. I don't care about what's happening. It's like if I were to try and care about everything, my heart would just be so full of sadness and anger all the time, and I can't have that in my life.
Yeah. It's a very difficult topic because I think people don't want to be seen as well, like my in my circumstance, you don't want to be seen as being cold or like detracted, but we're almost applying the same logic we have for picking businesses to or small projects to like caring or participating. And I think if we were to roll it into kind of like a framework, maybe it is that you can only really have one or two things that you really kind of fully care about. And I also would say that when confronted with an issue, like trying to go a little bit deeper, as you said, like rather than like just take it at face value, go a little bit deeper and see is there actually something that can be done to improve that? And then also once you figure out like maybe there is something that could be done, like to what degree are you gonna take action on that thing? And it could be that you're just donating. That's like, I would say, very low friction action. Or it could be like actually physically like campaigning or going out and doing something. But I think like any issue that you see, it should have some form of action that comes out of it, right? Or else it's just meaningless, like, it's almost entertainment. Like you're just like seeing the news, you're just like feeling sorry about it. Maybe you're like fighting with some troll on the internet about it. But it's not really making an effect. Almost to the same degree as like, there's like survey.com or whatever it is that like people think, oh, if we just have enough people like sign up to the survey, yeah, it's like maybe it shows something, but is it really, gonna actually grease the wheels of like, continuous motion to actually get something changed?
So I agree with you. I agree with you on all those points. And I think another thing that I would encourage people to do is to take a step back and to look at the broader picture. So let's say, for instance, there's a stock market crash, or a recession. Say like, oh, the stock market's going down. people are going to lose their livelihoods, everything's going to be terrible. It's like you just take a look at the chart for this year and you instead look at the chart for the last 30 years, the last 40 years, the last 100 years, and it makes you appreciate just how much progress we've actually made. And so while the economic downturn can look really bad in the short term, um, taking a look at it over a much larger time frame makes us realize like things are good. So, for instance, South Africa, people always talk about there being a lot of crime and specifically violent crime over here, and that is a reality here. However, if we see like an uptick in crime this year, if you take a look at crime over the last 40 years, crime is, a fraction of it was 40 years ago, and it's been consistently going down. But with all of these graphs, they're spiky as they go down. Like one year is going to be worse than the year before, but the overall trend is in the right direction. And so I do encourage people to just take a look at the macro trends instead of focusing on the day-to-day fluctuations of negativity.
Yeah, and I agreed. Like, I think I was doing like a walking tour in either Cambridge or Oxford, and they said that there was like a wall around the initial university because there were so many brawls happening outside that because so many people were like drunk and disorderly that they had to have like a wall to kind of protect people who wanted to kind of study. So I think like yeah, if you look back to like I guess 300 years ago when there was like serfdom and all this kind of stuff, it was like a much worse place to be. You couldn't even walk down the street without getting into a fight with your neighbor. Um, but I think there's also something to be said about not just finding different sources of information, but finding them through different mediums. So I've been like every now and again, I'll go and like buy a newspaper and I'll read that because I think also increasing the friction to consume media also means that you've got more time to kind of actually like consume it and think about it.
Also, the friction to create media, which you brought up earlier.
Mm. Yeah, and also like I've also been like I've subscribed to like a few magazines. I mean, it's not super expensive, but you like when you're physically reading it, you're not like being distracted by other forms. And there's also no commentary, so you can kind of come up with your own opinion first, and then if you have like some discussion about it, you can kind of like bring in nuggets of it. But it's not like there's not like an immediate like someone's perspective on something, and you kind of I do think there's a link between the amount of time that someone puts into creating a piece of content and the value of that content. Because there's obviously like, why would someone spend so much of their time? Maybe it's a philosophical thing, but why would they spend so much of their time creating something that's junk, right? You'd expect like a reasonable person would want something to be good so that other people will find it good, right? So yeah, I think those are some like neat tactics that we can kind of give to people.
Absolutely. And I think to sort of sign it off, related to the looking at the macro picture thing is that, again, we don't see the good news because the good news is happening all the time, right? Is the wars that aren't currently going on don't make it into the paper. And right now, despite there being wars, and again, I don't want to diminish that these are, these mass losses of human lives are absolute travesties, but we are still living in the most peaceful period of all of human history.